Hello? Yeah, so the last discussion session that we have for this year's Climateurope Festival is about resilient infrastructure. I think something that is important for each one of us. And the first thing that crossed my mind was how badly we were prepared for the floods in 2014 here in Serbia and the rest of the region. Or when I bought my Wellington boots, preparing for Aqua Alta in Venice, and I was told that they wouldn't do the work, that I needed those fishing boots that come to your waist, and I thought it was a joke. But then one day I woke up and I had water of 1.2 meters in front of my door. But flood is only one of the challenges we are dealing with. And although we have all-male panel today, it is diverse enough to help us tackle all different challenges that are related to resilient infrastructure. And in particular, I think we'll be speaking about cities. So we have Julius and Filip, who can give us some specific examples of climate change adaptation in a city, and maybe we can speak about how we can scale it up and put city climate on the agenda. And then Adriaan could help us having more comprehensive picture and think what are all the aspects that we need to consider when we are planning about resilient cities. And then finally we could tackle something about financing resilient cities and adaptations in the cities. And also let's see what are the specific characteristics of climate services for the cities. Julius, do you want to start? Yes. Yeah, please. We will have, again, a few minutes presentations, and then we will open the floor for the questions and discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Julius Pro from Climate Service Center Germany. And my story today is also about, or of course, about resilient cities. And this product we developed is called GERICS Adaptation Toolkit for Cities, which is, to be really honest, not developed by me, rather than by two colleagues of mine, Steffen Bender and Markus Groth. And yeah, let me start by more or less jumping over this one. But yeah, which might be important for you to know that GERICS is working as a think tank for climate services, and while doing so, we are developing climate service prototypes. And the rest of I will skip today because we have only 5 minutes. Let me start by show you this product, which is one of many prototype products we develop at GERICS. And as I mentioned before, it's called GERICS Adaptation Toolkit for Cities. And what is it? It's working to support the adaptation activities of cities, obviously, and it's organized in modules. So you can see a lot of different modules here. For example, we have urban water, we have urban green, we have thermal comfort and housing environment, but we have also something like communication or monitoring and quality assurance. And this prototype is still in development, so sometimes we develop some new models. For example, right now we are working, which is quite relevant for this talk, I guess, on a module which is called Critical Infrastructure, where we look, amongst other things, at domino and cascade effects in cities. But today I would like to look at one module which is already developed. It's called Climate Adapted Urban Development, and here more in detail on the vulnerability analysis and hotspot mapping. So this is the process of how we developed this prototype at GERICS. So at the beginning, before we start to develop such a module, there's always a specific need from a city. So a city approaches us and tells us, okay, for example, in this case, the city of Kiel approached us and said, we want climate-adapted urban development. And since we didn't have any modules for this climate-adapted urban development, it was something new which we can develop with them together. So we said, okay, let's do it. And we started by using the existing frameworks for urban development in Germany, which are called a land use plan and development plan. Then in the second step, we added regional climate data, and so we selected climatic parameters such as annual mean temperature, precipitation or dry periods. And of course, when doing so, we used the largest possible ensemble of available climate projections. And the next step, that's like the first result we have the GERICS hotspot maps, which can be actually used for many other modules as well, and as well as other products we develop. And here we make the vulnerability analysis and considering the exposure to changing climatic conditions in this step. In the next step, we examining possible adjustment options of the hotspots for the city. So we are always in talk with the city in the whole process, but here we look at should we change the hotspot maps because something is different in the city. And at the end, we have the result, the catalog of possible adaptation measures for the city, which can be really detailed. And but at the end of how many of those adaptation measures will be implemented is like a totally different topic. That's just the way how we come to the first result, and how they will be implemented is a new topic. And when you look at this process, it might look kind of linear to you, but in reality it looks more like something like this. So that's how we usually at GERICS try to develop such a prototype with them together. So we always have on the upper side the practitioner knowledge containing specific requirements, practical knowledge. On the lower side we have the climate research knowledge, and then we try to interconnect both in a user-centric manner, but it always has this climatic background. So we always use climate science. Then at the end of the day, we have the climate service product. Coming to the conclusion, in urban development planning right now, climate adaptation plays little or no role, at least for Germany. And obviously, new applications always have to address actual needs. And the hardest step for the adaptation process is the implementation into daily businesses, and you already heard that's not always the case. But let me finish my talk by showing you this picture. So in theory, when you start to work with a city, for example, it might look easy. You start at point A and you know your target, what you want to achieve, so that's B. So that's obviously a clear process, but yeah, in practice, it looks more like the yellow picture. Thank you very much.
So I would like to thank the organizers to invite me to give a presentation. I feel honored. Thank you. So I have a few slides about, in fact, the Climate Fit City project, which is on urban areas, an important part of the infrastructure of a country, I think. Also the hotspots of innovation, so where things are happening. And let's say maybe a little bit of history. I was thinking at it when I was sitting there that, okay, at VITO, so I'm from VITO, it's a Flemish research organization. We have a lot of expertise in urban air quality modeling. So in Flanders, we're even more known for urban air quality than for urban climate. So from that activity, we have been working a lot with cities in Flanders. So we know them quite well. We know the ecosystem. We know all the organizations active in cities. So, but luckily, while working on urban air quality, we also already looked at the urban meteorology, because urban meteorology impacts urban air quality. So from that expertise, we built our urban climate services. So we have been working on this for, let's say, 8 years now. So we have a lot of projects with the cities of Antwerp, Ghent, and Brussels, and even smaller cities in Flanders. But okay, we felt a little bit hindered by our geography in Flanders. So it's a quite small area. So how do we scale up our expertise? So that was our ambition for this project, how to scale up. So then we started to brainstorm, and okay, we came up with this conclusion, which we think is kind of a representation of the situation, where you have, on the one hand, you have city administrations that, okay, they cannot do something directly with what we call the IPCC data, which are the larger, the regional data set. There's two cores, there's no urban aspect in it. But okay, you have also local purveyors. Those are consultants. There are a lot of consultants working in urban areas. They know the city, they know the demand, but they have no expertise at all in working with IPCC data. So, and on the other hand, you have us, Vito, experts in urban climate data generation, working with cities in Flanders, but having difficulties working with cities abroad. We have a few examples, a few, let's say, exceptions, but in a structured way, working abroad is difficult because you have business barriers and so on. So let's say, okay, we built this project to bring together, let's say, the urban climate data providers, urban actors, and end users. So that was the objective. So I think so it was a real business objective to set up this project and to valorize our research. So to give you a little clue about what we're doing, these are results for the city of Barcelona and Rome, if you're not already guessed. So this is high resolution 100-meter urban climate maps. And what is specific about our expertise is that we do long-term simulations at a rather, let's say, limited computational cost. We're about 100 times faster than regional climate modeling. So this is at 100 meter, and we also do now more and more, when working with the cities, we go to the meter scale. So it's really integration of 3D building models, vegetation. So really looking more also at human comfort indexes. So it's very challenging, but okay, we're working on it. So we set up the project, and we looked for partners and cases. And we have an idea that we should look at all things happening in urban areas, not only at urban planning. It's an important case in our project, but also at other things, such as active mobility, building energy. Performance of buildings is impacted by weather and climate. We even have a case on cultural heritage in Rome, where we work with the people managing the Colosseum, but also interested in climate information. We have a case on emergency planning. Also, the city is facing more and more emergency cases, and they want to, let's say, also educate the people in the city to cope with these emergencies, because the firemen cannot do everything on their own. So you need capacity building at the citizen level also. And we also have health and urban planning. I'm not going to go in detail through all of them, because I only have 5 minutes. Maybe I already spoke 5 minutes, but just about the urban planning, I think this is a nice one. It's also the most advanced business case, I think, is the urban planning case, because you have a lot of infrastructure works. You have a lot of things happening, so maybe at the questions level I can give you some examples of what people do with the information at the at the city level. But okay, this is a development we're implementing with a Czech IT partner to implement an interactive platform where people can upload structural plans and so on, and impact and look at urban climate, which is now more and more often also an aspect of development, urban development. So we have our demonstration cases. So you saw the map a few slides earlier. And now we have reached the stage in the project where we are finishing the demonstration cases, and we are upscaling inside the project. So we define these replication cases. This was quite challenging because these are cases executed with partners at city level that don't receive any funding. So they like to work with us because they think it's interesting and they would like to do something with us. So we have European cases. We also have a Dhaka in Bangladesh, because our Czech partner has a lot of links with the international financing institutions. And also a nice one is, for example, the cultural heritage case that we are executing. So in this second phase, we are going to look not at cultural heritage, but going to look at animal heritage. So we're working with the Zoo of Antwerp. Also very interested in urban climate data and information. So that's it in a nutshell. Maybe it was not too long, sorry.
Thank you. We will have time for the discussion and questions. So maybe we can continue with Adriaan. Would you like to?
So my presentation is more philosophical, you could say. So it's not tied to one particular project. I'm drawing a bit on lessons we learned from several projects we did over time, including EU Max, but also much other stuff. So if you think about infrastructure in the first place, that what are the drivers, in fact, why owners or managers of infrastructure are interested in climate services? There may be really principal basic approaches. So it can be, you can see it as an asset management issue, and that can be really important, especially by strongly economically motivated infrastructure. It will be important that it's also economically viable, which means that the functionality and the value of the infrastructure is really an important driver, and you have to realize that. And that if you can serve into that, that's important. For example, Iranet Road, an IRANET that existed 5 to 10 years ago. So they had a very practical approach to climate change challenges. It appears that after all, asphalt costs are a very big part of the whole maintenance cost of the road system. So even in the future, if we want to have less cars, we probably still will have a lot of roads. And in fact, this whole climate challenge was translated into, okay, how is asphalt behaving in the future and what kind of asphalt we need in the future, and do a lot of research on that, and also, in fact, climate service related. So that's an example of asset management driven, and it was really relevant. I mean, it's more than half the cost is related to asphalt, so it was a very good way to focus on something that directly helps a lot. But you can also have an integrative approach. Especially if you think of longer term, if you think also about disaster reduction concerns, for example, hydrological management often then ties in with land use and with spillover effects to the energy system or to the transport system. So you possibly don't only want to use to purely your water flows or whatever, you want to look to other things as well. And for transport, for example, if you want to integrate mitigation and adaptation policies, it may be wise not to look to only one transport system, but to all of them, and to account for changes in the modal split due to policies also directly tied to what it may mean for adaptation. Of course, the challenge, especially in urban context, where you get a lot of different interests, where you also have to look to social dimensions, etc., health, whatever, it gets very complex then, so that gets then the challenge. And you also have to, for example, get it endorsed by that community based on a democratic process. Then looking to more sort of methodological angles, of course at the moment quite popular is now nature-based solutions. So think of green roofs in cities, but also outside cities we are going ever more to like space for flooding in rivers or whatever, that kind of solutions. And then we have indeed, as I just already mentioned, another important point is start to account for mitigation also in adaptation-oriented solutions. That can be really important. And renewable energy is one example, but no doubt, for example, in transport and urban planning in general, the building stock, whatever, these things count. And another element is, if you want to get efficient in the long run, you also have to take care that your performance and condition monitoring of your infrastructure system that you have to manage and is well developed, because that helps you to learn. That's really important as well. So now you have to realize, if you start to approach with a possible user of climate services, that adaptation planning can still be cast in all kinds of ways. That can depend on the policy cycle that country or city is in, because it may mean that it's automatically already more or less integrated, or they may be automatically more or less interested in particular questions, depending on where they are in the whole policy cycle. Whether they are more at the implementation side, or whether they still want to make strategic decisions, for example, that makes all kinds of differences. Also, whether they have already learned a lot and dare to integrate more, or whether it's the first time, and it may be a bit risky to be over-ambitious and start to integrate everything, for example. Another approach is that if you look to what we learned both in the first place from cities, but also in fact from the other sectors that we looked at in EU MAX, there are sort of main motivations why after all they start to use climate services. It may indeed be adaptation, but for example resilience, even in companies, if you understand resilience broad, so also the viability of the company in the long term, that's also a kind of resilience, that may be the main driver. In cities, for example, you see now emerging, especially in developing country cities, the social development goals, the whole set of 17 or whatever. So, and that's a very good backdrop for, in a simple way, as a checklist, but even more, perhaps also as a basis for methods to assess. But that may mean that you start to talk about very different types of climate services. So you have really to understand what is this prime driver, and first listen to that and not try too much to offer all kinds of other things that in principle may be relevant, but are outside the frame that is politically or otherwise defined by the user. Okay, now an example of if you try to use nature-based solutions, in this case for green roofs. And this also relates to the complexity if you want to have an integrated climate service. You can even have a discussion, where does the climate service start and stop? So this is sort of all the elements that you have to consider. If you would have a green roof strategy for a city, you have to look to a lot of different things. There are, of course, in the first place, you have to understand the physical environment. So you need indeed climate data. You need also soil data and that kind of things. But you also need to understand how the building stock is developing, what are juridical consequences, and what are how are responsibilities defined in that city. These things all count on whether people are motivated to do something and who, and under which conditions, etc., etc. And all these things in the end affect what makes sense for a particular type of green roof and where. However, indeed, depending on who you talk to, it may be indeed that the user wants really an integrated system. They want something that answers all these questions, which would mean an integrated climate service. In other cases, they may want only answer on particular questions. And this is also gets a matter of manageability. How much can you manage in one system? Because for this, you need a lot of different expertise together. But we did this this is based on a project in Finland, Ensure, and I forgot the other one, Recast. And we have also done really modeling in the background for this. Another example, Öklim, that is now a joint GPI ERA 4CS project about urban climate modeling, where we merge or connect, better to say, urban climate models with urban development models, including describing the development of the building stock and the population as well in decades ahead. Sort of the direct first-rate climate service would, for example, that you see, you can show heat stress, for example, at high resolution scales. But because we have the building stock also described, we can also connect it to models that say something about value formation of the building stock. So the square meter price reacts to these systems as well, for example. And again, you can ask, is that still a climate service or not? And that depends on the framing that the city has in what they want to know. Okay, so some questions now. So what are the arguments in favor or against integrated climate services for infrastructure, perhaps? Could there be a modular kind of climate service allowing for flexible movement across levels of sophistication? Because I remember this statement that what is now very popular is this seamless prediction, but it seems also that we need a sort of seamless sophistication. So in fact, you should be able to offer something that may be answering questions at different levels of sophistication. Not all the time people want all the detailed information. They may, perhaps at a later stage in the decision process, they may need more detailed information. If you can integrate that, that might be really helpful. And what about a final thing, what about the evolving observation infrastructure of climate and ambient environment itself? In fact, that's also an important infrastructure, and there's happening a lot there. I'm not going into detail because my time is running out, but that's another question that could be raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriaan. I was afraid that we would go in the direction of how climate change could affect our fear of death, but these are philosophical questions which I think we can still tackle in our half-an-hour discussion. And Ludwig, please, if you would like to share your last presentation. Here, I have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to talk to you now about what kind of needs EIB has for resilient infrastructures, in particular for green cities. We are quite engaged in those topics since many years, but green cities in particular become more and more prominent thematic, considering that more and more people will live in cities. And so I won't repeat what are our focus now in terms of climate risk management system, which I presented before. By the way, I forgot to mention that we have the mastermind, Rasmus Lauritsen, in the room for this system. So if you have any specific questions on how it works, please ask Rasmus. So as I was saying, we look at the risks all along the project cycle, very important. So we have a number of climate services needs, also for resilient infrastructures and green cities. a few project examples just to show you the types of projects we support and how we are engaged in those topics. For example, we support the city of Athens. The city of Athens is part of a partnership which is called 100 Resilient Cities, and they have developed a resilience strategy for 2030, by 2030, to become a fully resilient city. And so they have a number of projects in this context, and EIB is supporting some of them, in particular on building green infrastructures or the natural-based solutions we were talking about, reducing the urban heat island effects, creating green corridors to promote ecosystem conservation and biodiversity development, etc. By the way, this project is partly financed by what we call in EIB the Natural Capital Financing Facility, NCFF. And in this Natural Capital Financing Facility, we still have resources. So if some of you know of any projects or project promoters that would be interested, this facility invests both in natural-based solutions for purely conservation or ecosystem restoration, nature-based tourism, but also climate change adaptation in rural areas, and also promoting green cities through nature-based solutions. So don't hesitate to refer to us. We have one colleague in our team who is specialized on this NCFF. Another aspect, another example in the city Zenata, which is north of Casablanca, which is the first eco-city in Morocco. And they have a number also of projects to make the city more resilient. And EIB is engaged in promoting resilience in this city through a number of supports, including, for example, designing the building structures and localization so that the wind flows would naturally cool the city, but also developing public parks, promoting also these green corridors I was talking about, but also having some retention ponds. You may know in Morocco the flash floods can be very devastating, and having some ways to reduce the floods is very critical. Another example is in the city of Tirana. We are treating the Lana River with a Lana River rehabilitation project, also there to avoid infrastructure damages on the river infrastructures. So by promoting a number of soft measures like building risk management plans, environmental impact assessment, but also building green and also hard infrastructure to protect against flash floods. So these are some examples that shows you the threats that are on our portfolio, the exposure of our portfolio to climate risks, but also that there are a number of opportunities for us out there for sustainable investment and profitability also at the benefit of local populations. Some questions for discussion now. I think there also we would need to have a better capitalization and database, or taking stock of the knowledge on adaptation options, so we can be better prepared within EIB, but also with all our partners to address adaptation in the context of sustainable infrastructures and green cities. I didn't talk about all the bridges and roads projects that the bank is supporting, but these also are traditional infrastructures that are very vulnerable in some localization, in some contexts, which we need to reinforce from the adaptation side. Also developing capacities in the context of our promoters, developing the capacities of the local banks we are lending to, developing the capacities of the final beneficiaries and our promoters is absolutely important. We would like to know also what exists in terms of tools, climate risk vulnerability assessment, data sets, climate information, etc., that would reinforce this climate risk management system that we have in place, that we are now developing, and that will be systematically used in the near future. We also launched very recently, Rasmus is supervising now a study on the costs and benefits of climate change adaptation, on the economics of adaptation, to look at how adaptation would impact both from the cost and the benefits point of view our portfolio and the number of projects we have that could address either resilience or adaptation in a positive way. And that may influence quite a lot the way we are conducting the economic and financial analysis of our project. So I think this is also an interesting topic for the future. Would be interesting to know if some of you are already working on these aspects, because we would need clearly also this kind of climate service in the near future. And that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. We have some 20 minutes for discussion, and I will just capitalize on the key words that I noticed, and I will go in the reverse version. So it would be green cities, how to reach comprehensive resilience policy, is the urban area where mitigation and adaptation policy can most easily meet, and how to deal with what Julius recognized as a big challenge, that climate change adaptation plays still a small role in urban developments. But before I open the floor to the audience, I would like to ask someone from the panelists to define what is the city. When you say urban area or city, as I would like to be sure that we don't skip or neglect some small settlements that sometimes are actually the most vulnerable one, and those with the smallest capacity to deal with the issues. So what do we mean by urban areas and cities in this concept?
Yeah, just the microphone. So we're now working more with the larger cities, because there you have the capacity to interact with us. They have some time to spend, to discuss with us, and they have the capacity, the knowledge, to when we're talking about climate and so on. But there's indeed a big gap at the lower level. In smaller cities and towns, there's not the capacity. So they're a bit neglected for the moment, I think. So once we have dealt with the big cities, we should, I think, develop a strategy how to also engage the smaller cities, which will be very challenging, I think. Because when you look at the climate analysis, we see that even smaller cities, it's not a linear relationship between the size of the cities and, for example, the urban heat island effect. Even smaller cities can have quite significant heat stress hotspots. So we have to also look at that. So maybe just to give you a nice information, so for the area of Flanders, which is for some people maybe one big city, so it's about 200 kilometers on 100 kilometers, so we just made a 100 resolution map for the whole of Flanders, so this will also allow small cities to identify and to become aware of it. But for the moment it's largely neglected, I think.
Yeah. Shared opinion.
Yeah, I think it's shared.
Do we have any questions? I'm sure we do. No? Okay. So I would like to go back to this issue of how to merge mitigation and adaptation on the city level. And is this the key part of this comprehensively resilient policy? Who would like to go ahead?
I just have a thought, but I don't know if it's interesting enough to share with you. But I think that cities are really the hotspots of innovation, because I think you have there the capacity to innovate, and it's also the hotspots where now the action on mitigation is taking place. So the Covenant of Mayors and so on, and you also see that C40 Cities Network is looking at more integrated climate action programs. So I think it's growing to each other, and especially at the urban scale, I think. Yeah.
But Adriaan, it was also part of your presentation, I think.
Yeah.
Conclusion from both of you.
Well, I agree that this is one of the important points, and where there could be more attention and get more benefits out of that. At the same time, if you say it that way, I feel there's a little bit of risk that in the practice it starts to be a lot about energy use in cities, and there are so many other aspects of mitigation. And even energy use may easily mean it's the local energy company you start. So mitigation may mean a lot of other things. And the city has the freedom also, for example, to refer to these social development goals in a much broader setting, which for the longer term, if you think about the eventual purpose of the sort of improving the well-being of the citizens, it may be better to have first a broader scope and then sort of sort out what you want to do inside there. Even with mitigation, adaptation, you could also have an approach which is emphasizing the living environment and the building stock much more, which may mean you get much more dispersed kind of energy solutions in relation to that you would get if you would just talk about renewable energy with the energy company, for example. So therefore, this is about all the time about the framing, and I'm not saying that one is worse than the other one, but you have to realize that it's happening if you make these choices.
Just a small comment on your question. I see also from the angle of the nature-based solutions that there we have a great opportunity to do systematically both adaptation and mitigation in a way that we, for example, are choosing where to plant trees or where to install specific green corridors or parks. This may have an effect on water retention in the city, or this may have an effect on air cooling, but also it will store carbon. And it is really a positive trend that I see, that we are talking about nature-based solutions in green cities. Also from that perspective of the combined mitigation and adaptation effect.
Julius, would you like to do you have any suggestion of how we can put it more on the agenda, adaptations as a part of urban planning and urban development?
Yeah, I think it's not easy, but I think we can do it. Let's start at the beginning. I mean, when we approach cities or city approaches us, it's often not clear for them the difference between mitigation and adaptation. So that's usually where we start, or where we sometimes start. And then it really also depends on the person you're working with in the city. So some people are really motivated, and for example, in the environmental administrations, they are sometimes really motivated, but sometimes they are not. And at the end of the day, I think, as Maria mentioned also in the talk before, that we have to help or to create this market to put it on the agenda as well. And by doing so, from a GERICS perspective, we have different possibilities. So we develop prototypes, but we don't offer those prototypes in an operational way. So if a city comes to us and wants a solution for which we have already the solution, we do not offer those solutions to the city because we already developed it. So what can we do? So we can give this prototype to, for example, some operational service, or we can give this prototype, for example, to a spin-off or a startup, which would help to create a market. If you give it to an operational service and it offers this product or prototype for free, it will more or less destroy the market for a potential startup. So we always have this both sides we have to look at. And even when we are giving a product to a startup, it's, I think, from the topic of cities, it's quite difficult because cities are very, very complicated. You have a lot of different things to look at, so the knowledge required for a product, as we have for the GERICS adaptation toolkit for city, is a lot. So I think there are a lot of barriers on the way to it, but I think it would be the right way to try to transfer those products to a startup, for example, to actively help and start this market, put it on the daily agenda of those cities. And I just want to add at the beginning what you said to on the cities. I also totally agree with you that smaller cities are more in need of those products right now, or on those climate services, because big cities, for example, Hamburg, where I come from, they are doing already a lot, but small cities, they don't have the capacity to even do this. It's the same for companies. Big companies like Deutsche Bahn has all the instruments to handle climate change and climate adaptation, but small and medium enterprises have the real problems and not the capacity to do it.
Thank you. Adriaan, would you like to answer your question? Yeah? Yes.
Yeah, you are asking about how to get more structural and continued action on adaptation, for example, in cities. Well, the first thing is sort of in general, sort of decision and political science. It means you have to organize the problem ownership. If no one really owns the problem, there won't happen much. And in policy instrument terms, it seems to be in the first place you have to make organizations or accountable for certain of these risks, so they do something. You can also, that doesn't mean you only have to punish them, but at least there should be an accountability system. And the first thing about that is that you make these risks clear, so you make them transparent. In that sense, we think that this emerging activity now in the financial sector are really very important, because if they start to demand climate risk reporting for all their own assets and whatever they have, that means they have to ask it from all their clients, which means basically the whole society or the whole economy has to work with that. And that means you really get a very generic improvement of the risk. And then the next step would be, in relation to that you make some obligations also about using sufficient quality data or certified data, which leads to the climate services. And another thing would be that you could start to think about instruments that really somehow stimulate. So there are these green bonds, for example, but you could also think about resilience bonds. In Canada, they have them already used a bit for wetland areas.
I hope that the scientists are helping to make this risk more transparent and not bringing additional confusion with all the talk about uncertainty. But I hope that's where communicators could help. And Isa precisely has a question.
Yeah, it's a broad question, because I don't know so much about adaptation community, but being in adaptation futures and sometimes hearing about cities, I see them as very active actors on climate adaptation. And my question is quite basic, is why cities are so active? It's because urban planners stay longer, they have longer life in making decisions than politicians, or, I don't know, it is only because they are closer to citizenship. What makes cities so active actors in climate adaptation?
Well, I think there is a host of reasons. I think it's partly also that some national governments have not been particularly active to take this up, and that if then enlightened mayors saw there's still a space for that, then so instead of the state level, then cities started it. I think in this case is really a reason why this got active, for example in the US, but even in Europe here and there. And then the other thing we realized that adaptation is partly really a regional thing, because the challenges vary between regions. So that's another reason why there is activity at this regional level. And it's nearer to the citizens, and then you get also the things that you were referring to that all count here.
Just would like to add that cities are also the hotspots where the impacts are felt mostly. So if you look at heat stress, it's really in the urban areas that you have. If you look at, for example, the number of heat wave days, which is a very accessible indicator, if you map that, it's twice the number of heat wave days in cities compared to the rural areas due to the urban heat island effect. And also if you look at flooding, a lot of the pluvial flooding takes place in urban areas because the sewage systems are not designed for these more intense precipitation events. So the city administration has to deal with a lot more extreme events. So, so they get the pressure from the ground to work on it.
Thank you. Yeah, I was also wanting to refer to this. Cities are places where there is a high concentration of infrastructures, and so the probability that there are some impacts on some of them is quite high, and we face that regularly with bridges that are damaged, with roads that are damaged, buildings, etc. Another aspect I can imagine is the cities being integrated in a wider landscape, where the provisioning for food, for example, depends on the rural areas around. And there is a feeling I can see in some of the public initiatives now from cities. There is a feeling of responsibility vis-à-vis these neighboring communities. And so the role of cities to build resilience for the wider landscape, I can imagine, is also a role that these cities could play more and more in the future.
Yeah, thanks, I agree. And I think also city has a chance to, or in general in cities, there is a chance to do mitigation, adaptation at the same time, as we said before. For example, green roofings, or they have the potential to do mitigation if you have green roofs, but also really on an adaptation place, because it helps to, if the roof is not too high, it helps to reduce the temperature on the street by, I think, around 2 degrees. And it also helps on the same time for precipitation. So you have different functions you can address with one measure. So it helps mitigation, adaptation, and even for adaptation in different ways. So it's a great thing, I think.
We have time for one more question. Yes, please.
Thank you. Very quick question. We've been talking about resilience, but it is not very clear for me. How do you define this resilience? Do you establish thresholds for resilience? Is resilience having less economic losses than in the past? I mean, how do you benchmark resilience when you address it?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult question, and having indicators for climate change adaptation is a big question. I know, for example, an institution like the Green Climate Fund has as main indicator the number of people affected by the impacts of climate change, and that is kind of their main indicator. They look at, okay, the baseline of the project, we have probably many people that are affected by drought or by floods. But after the project, we are aiming that far less people can be vulnerable. So that would be their indicator. But we need to move beyond this and look also at ecosystem indicators. What is the good status of an ecosystem before an adaptation option or strategy? We need to look also at the economic aspects of adaptation in terms of what we can consider as being a good resilience or adaptation impact vis-à-vis the amount of losses that we will suffer from, or the amount of benefits that will be developed through the project. So I don't have a precise answer, but this is an evolving science, this adaptation metrics and indicator framework.
So I think nowadays, if we talk a lot about cities, then resilience gets a broad significance. So it has a social aspect, an economic aspect, a governance aspect. So on the one hand, it would be about that a particular impact is not, or a particular event, extreme event, doesn't have an enormous impact for a start. So in that sense, it's not enormously vulnerable. And on the other hand, also the recovery is happening reasonably fast and also in a fairly equitable way. That is a qualitative way to describe it. And for infrastructure, you could use a bit similar terms. So that would mean the functionality of infrastructure remains by and large intact, and the recovery of the system to its originally planned functionality level is really acceptable and not disturbing too much. It's a very good question. Okay, what does it mean in practice? That really depends on what are the operational criteria of these systems. How is that defined? So that can vary. I was in a conference 1.5 years ago of the Nordic Council Research Circle. And from the National Technical University of Norway, there was a specialist showing that even for European countries, for example, the official risk guidelines, for example, about what is acceptable risk is not the same, for example, which means really even in Europe, member countries are accepting slightly higher, even fatalities. They are not judging them exactly the same, for example.
Yeah, I probably also don't have the perfect answer for your question, but I would highlight this problem because when we approach cities, there's always a problem of how can we quantify the things we want to do. So in general, cities, I think they have plans for critical infrastructure, for example, but of course they are not really climate adapted. and to really, so it would be really important to quantify those, so they are also, that would be improve the willingness to pay for them for climate services, especially in this part. And right now we cannot really quantify it, so the willingness to pay from cities is mostly not there, in my opinion.
Filip, is there anything you would like to add for concluding? Okay, I would, just for the end, what Antonio mentioned and Isa earlier this morning, how we term different concepts is still a challenge, particularly for new communities and young communities such as climate services communities. I think we should all pay more attention maybe to that and start to try to put some roots into our terminologies and definitions we are using, and that might really help this contact both with cities or any other stakeholders once they understand us better and that we know we are all on the same page. And for the end, I would just like to announce one thing, particularly could be interesting for our hosts, our colleagues from Belgrade and the region. And we spoke a lot about innovation, so there is one initiative by young colleagues from Novi Sad, another city in Serbia, and Climate Kick. They're organizing a Climathon. It's just a type of hackathon where they will be suggesting in a 24-hours very ambitious work, they will be suggesting innovative climate solutions for the city of Novi Sad. So I would like to ask our hosts to promote this among their communities and their students. And for the end, I would like just to thank our panelists.
You can stay here or you can move. I would say that we are most probably on the last 100 meters of the festival. And that's why I think it's a good time now for a short feedback. It will be open session. You can stand up and say some nice words or maybe critical words. If you don't do it, go downstairs, try to find the wish tree and put a bit more leaves on there, again with the nice wishes or maybe with the critical wishes, because after the festival is just before the festival. Someday, somewhere, we will have our third and last festival, and we would like to improve it. It would be difficult to top this festival, but we try to do our best. So, you have a lot of information in your head, I suppose, I assume. But let me give you a bit more on top. Let's remind you on our interactive sessions from yesterday, and Dominic, when we dance, Dominic did a good job and summarized all of our take-home messages. And I give them 5 minutes maximum to guide you, to remind you what we discussed yesterday before dancing. Yeah.
Can you use this? Okay, yeah, so I was asked to give a quick summary feedback session on the workshop yesterday. Maybe you find yourselves on the picture there. Now this only has to work. Right. So I won't bore you with the whole process. You were all here and Johannes already talked about it yesterday. Just to remind you that what the purpose of our exercise yesterday was, you will notice that there's nothing written there about creating a business model or a business plan, improving something, but rather it's about sharing perspectives and communication. Nevertheless, it's important to sort of stimulate conversation on the right topics. If you all sit together and talk about your favorite kinds of dogs, then we did a bad job. So what I tried to do is look at what kind of conversations came up in the group. Just so that you can feel a bit bad for me while you were having wine and food and there's rumors about some dancing. I transcribed all the results from the session yesterday and I ran it through one of these word count tools. If you don't know how they work, the bigger the word, the more often the word came up in the text that you input. And can you imagine that this came up when I did this? I mean, it's quite, you know, business-centered, company-centered. The good news is that this is not from our session yesterday, but this is from a purposefully badly written business proposal. This is the actual results from our session yesterday. So while this is of course far from a scientific evaluation or even an evaluation in an organizational development context, it does sort of give you a direction or at least, you know, a hint at what was talked about and if sort of the conversations went into the right direction. And I think you did a very good job of, you know, moving or concentrating on the factors that are actually relevant when we want to facilitate this kind of interaction between providers and users, as you can see here. A little bit more in depth, you won't really be able to see this here, but it's on the next slides. When you talk about the business model canvas, there's also an evaluation that you can do afterwards, where you ask, you know, seven questions. Did we talk about the right things? Did we address the right things? Again, this 2-hour session yesterday, it would be utopian to think that there would be any, you know, concrete answers. But I was just trying to see if groups were talking about even addressing these topics. So the first one was to ask yourself about switching costs, which means, you know, what does it cost my customers to move from one product to the other, or to move towards my product or away from my product. Costs, again, is not monetary. It's everything that they have to do. And I think we really covered this one. There were some aspects mentioned in almost all of your working groups. The other one is recurring revenues. Again, I won't go through all of them, just this was addressed as well. Where do my recurring revenues come from? Not only initial funding, earning versus spending. Again, this was covered quite well. The cost structure and especially competition, that is something that we as Foresight Intelligence are going to take home, and maybe something that you can take home. Was not really addressed. So so just an analysis of, you know, who else provides similar products, and how do they get their customers? How do they sustain their livelihood? Basically, is something that definitely we're going to take home, and something that could be addressed. This was one of the highlights actually from the results for a 2-hour session. If you can look at where does additional funding for the project come from, if you can find an actual way to see where funding can come from without having to do extra work. I mean, if this is a concrete option for 2 hours, that's excellent. Same goes for the next slide. If you found out something about scalability, which at least in one project, I think it was 2, there were some comments on that. That's something that's usually in the world of startups, that's a breakthrough moment if you find something about scalability. And the other one, which was actually quite prominent in all of the groups, was protection from competition. So basically, what can I do that my product is better than others, or what can I do that users stay with me instead of switching to a different product? That was also quite well covered. You will all get the actual results of our evaluation later on. This is just the work of last afternoon, and to show you that we actually covered quite a bit of relevant questions, I think. So again, I think, you know, communication, that's quite clear, that happened, and I think you all did a really good job. And also, I just tried to show you quickly that, you know, I think we actually went in the right direction, and communication was on the right topics. What to do next? If you think that this helped you, this way of sort of structuring communication helped you in any way, we of course do not own this model. Everybody can take this home, do it at home. If you think it helped you, invite other people. Use this to structure, to talk about your offers. And another thing that's quite important is once you feel that you have done this and you have a model that you think is quite comprehensive, tell the story in the sense of tell it to someone else. And if you notice that you can't really tell the story from beginning to end of how this should work out, usually there's a sort of a stone to trip over involved that makes you think about it. In this case, if you use this model, tell the story sticky note by sticky note. If you leave anything out, probably you can leave it out. If you have a gap, probably you need to fill that gap. And yeah, because you always meet twice in life, I look forward to hearing your success stories the next time we meet. If you're successful before we meet, you can send me an email and tell me about it.
Thank you very much. Any questions, urgent questions to Dominic? No. Okay, thank you very much, Dominic. So, as I said, it's a feedback session, it's an open session. It's allowed to say everything. So, does somebody would like to say urgent feedback to us? Any urgent feedbacks?
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's too early to say thank you. It's just 20 meters less. So after 20 meters, you will say thank you.
Yeah, I was speaking with Chris yesterday at the castle, and he asked me, what do you think about the festival? I said, okay, great initiative. And I told him that I especially like the fact that the festival is taking place in remote areas where climate science, climate services are not so well developed. So I think this, if you're looking for a location for another one, I would advise you even to go to another location like, I think, why not?
No, I mean Smerdeva, it was also a nice place to go and do climate services on the top of the fortress with a view of Danube. Maybe we'll do it someday somewhere, So, any other remarks?
Just a question. Well, first of all, congratulations for the organization. This has been really interesting. I fully appreciate the time I have devoted to come here and be here with you. I hope that you can say the same about my participation. But my question is, one of the fantastic things in this festival has been the work of Joel Cooper, who is very scientifically behind there, drawing everything we say. And my question is, will these drawings be available for us somewhere? Because, I mean, this is maybe the best way I have to bring home the messages that were relayed here. Thank you.
Okay, Thank you very much, Joel. Any other Rasmus.
It's actually just to follow up on that. I think the graphics are fantastic, but also there was an enormous amount of fantastic presentations. And I can't absorb them all, I can't remember them all, but I'd like to be able to go back and say, yes, that was the slide where I explained that. That's exactly the idea I need to launch. Is there some way we can have like a central repository or a way to...
you know this guy, he's streaming everything. Be careful what do you say. It's everything in stream and everything is recorded, except our dancing. Sorry to do it.
Too bad.
What? Oh. No. So let's do a bit seriously. We collect everything, we collect all the presentations. I will ask people if they would like to send our posters. We will do a big cloud, hopefully a big cloud, and everything is recorded. So we don't do minutes, we recorded everything so you can go and see again our speeches, look at our faces. I mean, we will stay with you for the next years, Any other?
Thank you, Lola. Yes, great. Thank you from my side as well. And our main objective here was also related to the place that you've chosen to come to Central or Eastern Europe, let's say. I'm not sure of the right term. But it's great to be here in Serbia. And for us, for JPI Climate, a European research funding collaboration initiative, it is one of our purposes to reach out to all of you. And we made very interesting contacts, and the thing is, I hope it will go on. And already the perspective to have a final conference of Climate Europe at the end of 2020, let's say, it's something that we prospect already in the future. So I hope that there will be a lot of contacts stabilized until then, and I'm very grateful for this. Thank you.
So, and then maybe we go to the overview concluding remarks. And Miguel, would you like to say something? You promised to do it. Is it the right minute to do it? Please go ahead. Oh, you can stay over there. So
I come here so I can see you all, because I think it's the best place. I will be brief. You've already said a lot of what I was thinking of saying, so I don't need to repeat the good words you've already said and what we heard as well last night. Thank you, everyone, for your positive energy and your willingness to make this a successful event. Thanks to the hosts for this wonderful venue and city and activities, and for organizing. Thanks for the organizers, Climate Europe, and all the team behind this event. Thank you to European Investment Bank for the funding. Thank you very much for supporting this activity and for asking the community to help you to solve your problems and to collaborate with your projects. I think, as I said, it's been successful. Great to be here. Call it Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, Central, whatever you want to call it. But it has the value of coming here, but also the value of attracting participants from neighboring countries that may not have been here if we were in Valencia again, or in Brussels, or somewhere else. So I think it has a tremendous value. There have been a range of activities which I've enjoyed, and plenaries, posters, workshops, trips to talk in situ about the future in wine while drinking a glass of wine. The streaming, a great idea for those who couldn't come. Very active in social media, as Climate Europe always is. We heard about the Crescendo High School competition, great ideas. The communication theme, we've heard a lot about it throughout the week, the 3 days, and I think that's common to any scientific activities I'm involved with. I mean, we need to always aim to communicate what we do better. I've enjoyed learning about the plans for a climate change law in Serbia on the first day, and also I'd like to see the greenhouse gas distribution that they have in their economy. It's perhaps a geeky kind of hobby, but it's good to know what problems each country is facing and what are the challenges. Very participative, very informal. I like the atmosphere. I think I've seen there is a common denominator in the two festivals, and it's wine. I saw wine pictures in the Valencia festival. Seeing wine again here, so perhaps it's linked to the emotions that it creates, and it certainly helps to lubricate sharing and learning, which is something I think we've done intensively during this week. Climate Europe, CSA, coordination and support action. We fund them specifically for this. So they are here to support you, but also they need you to support them. So I encourage you to share information with them, inform them of what you're doing, make sure that everyone is in the know, all the interesting activities that you do in your projects, share lessons learned, share success story, and importantly, share also the not so successful stories, because there is as much to learn there as there is from the good examples, and sometimes it's always a problem with science that we are not a bit shy to share where we don't get it right. So I think that's That's important. As I said, support the European Investment Bank. They ask you for help, so I encourage you to try and help them with their tools and their projects, but also other guests that we had, like the FAO and the European Bank for Development and Reconstruction, Europa RE, etc., etc. These are good objectives to work towards to help them with that. I think there was something in the agenda about COP24. Again, bring your solutions to COP24. Speak with the Commission, yes, but also with your member state or non-member state government, with your administration, local, regional, national, wherever you are. Make sure you communicate what you're doing, make sure to find out what they need, and make sure to at least try and work in that direction. And I won't finish without reminding you again that you can submit an abstract to ECA. That's taking place in Lisbon in May next year. And hopefully, in the future, we will be able to bring ECA to Eastern Europe. So, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Chris, would you like to close the festival? No.
Yeah, so I guess I'm sad and happy. So sad that we are at the end, but happy personally. It has been very, very successful. I've got some notes here to try and remind myself of what I've seen as the successes. So it's slightly random actually, but the size of the meetings, so I've had discussions with several of you over the last day or two, particularly yesterday afternoon. So yesterday afternoon was a chance where I could actually spend time on the bus, walking around in the evening, talking to people, trying to get some feedback like this session here, but on a one-to-one basis. So that was very useful. So one of the topics I asked some people about was the size of this meeting. So there are, I don't know, about 100 people here. Valencia was a similar size. And we had originally envisaged the final festival being much larger. And I sort of am looking out here and the feedback I've had, people thought this was a good size. Because you do have a chance to interact with each other. It's manageable, as someone said, to actually go around and talk to as many people in this as you want to. You have a good chance of catching up with people over coffee or sightseeing or dancing. And if it was hundreds and hundreds of people, that would be much more difficult. But that's something we need to think about. This meeting's been, in my view, very good size. So in Valencia, we had a session like this, and we had some feedback, and some of the issues, I think most of the issues we've managed to address, although interesting. So one of them that came up in Valencia was the gender balance. Until this morning.
The last session
I know, it was quite funny. So in Valencia, I mean, we just got to be honest. So the opening day, it was pretty much all men standing up here with the microphone. It did get better on day 2 or day 3, I can't remember, but day 1 was pretty bad. And so we have addressed that, and to be fair to this program, apart from this morning, it has been much more balanced. But yes, the first day, we had the opposite. There were 5 or 6 women and 1 man up here on a panel discussion. So I think overall, if you add it all up, I think that the balance has been much better. But in Valencia, it was quite noticeable that it was imbalanced. Describing, yep, so this has been very successful. So we did this a different way in Valencia. We had it being drawn and then put up on the wall straight away, and this time we've gone for a different approach. And I think if we do this again at the 3rd festival, we may well consider a different approach again. I think it's good to try different things, and I'm a big fan of the scribing. Thank you very much. The live web feed, yes, that has been really good. So it is a challenge to be physically in the room, cost, time, all these things, carbon as well. So we are trying to reach out to as many people as possible. Personally, I don't think there is any real way of doing it better than actually face-to-face, the networking aspect. I think it is more effective to be face-to-face, but we are conscious there is an impact on us and the carbon and things. So the live feed, we've tried that, and the figures we've had, there have been a lot of people watching on the internet, which is good news. Miguel said this, I think we had a good balance here of the plenary presentations, panel discussions, interactions, the music the other evening, yesterday's opportunities to interact, and I think that has been really good. And people I've spoken to have thought the networking opportunities have been very, very good, and we are very keen to do it. This is not a conference. This is not a project meeting for the Climate Europe project or whichever other project. We've called it a festival. I mean, I wouldn't wear this to a festival, obviously, back in the UK, but it's not supposed to be a conference. It is supposed to be more interactive, in some ways more engaging, more fun, but much more interactive than a conference. So that's why we've done the program like this. Diogo from the European Commission, many of you know, works with Miguel. He was at the Valencia Festival, and he made an intriguing comment during the feedback that he thought we should try and engage better with the younger generation and the youth. And I said this on the opening day, I didn't imagine what that would actually mean here. It was fantastic. It's a shame they've gone now, but it was absolutely fantastic, I thought, having the Albanians come here, the school children come here. So we are trying to engage more with the youth. As has been said, they are the people who are going to be dealing with the climate issues in the future. I thought that was very good. Eastern Europe has been mentioned, but I quickly tried to tally up the number of countries that I think are represented at this festival. I might have got the number slightly wrong, but I made it 23 different countries have been to this festival. It's somewhere around the 21 to 24 number, which I find quite remarkable, how many different countries we're managing to engage physically in the room here, and then additional ones on the live web feed, I suspect. So that has been incredible. I didn't imagine that would happen, but in particular, so many different countries from Eastern Europe, which I don't think would have been represented when we were in Valencia. Obviously a lot from Serbia, which we expected, but many, many others: Macedonia, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Slovenia, Croatia, Latvia, Slovakia. The list was quite remarkable, and that's been very, very successful. It's been said by several other people, but I just want to say that as well. The food and the wine and the hospitality have been excellent. Yes, Miguel, there's a theme there, I guess, with wine, but it's interesting. The talks that we had yesterday afternoon I thought were absolutely fantastic. As I said yesterday, slightly flippantly, but I think it is true. We were standing there in a vineyard, hearing from someone who owns a vineyard, and then also Antonio Graça about another application in Portugal, hearing about the impact of climate variability and climate change on, in that case, wine. But it was just so real, rather than sitting in a conference room or reading a document. It really, really was real, and I thought it was fantastic having that. And then the food, so we've in particular in Valencia, we heard a lot about the impact of climate and climate change on food, and these things I think are really, really good. Another big success, particularly yesterday morning, but generally with the posters, has been the large range and large number of projects and activities that you're all representing. And so Climate Europe is here to try and facilitate this, as Miguel said. So we're here to help facilitate the networking, bring these projects forward, and it is a two-way thing. It's exactly as Miguel said. He said it very well. So we need you, and please do engage with us, because we are trying to create this community. The weather's been great. I mean, I work for the Met Office in the UK. Weather's obviously something I'm passionate about, and the weather has been fantastic, slightly flippantly. But overall, I'm very, very pleased. I would really like to hear now, or emails, or however format you want to do it, any other comments, feedback to myself or Lola or whoever about what's gone well, what we could do better, because we do want to make this better and better. This has been excellent, but I'm sure we can do some things differently. So I'm now going to finish with thanks. The danger of doing this is that you always forget someone, so apologies in advance if I do forget someone. So firstly, thank you to the European Commission, because they fund the Climate Europe Coordination and Support Action. So this is how we're then creating these festivals. But also, thank you, there are 3 of them in the room, and in my experience, that's unusual, and it's fantastic that they are interested, engaged in this community, and I think we should all see that as a very positive thing, and thank you to the 3 representatives from the European Commission here. Thank you to the European Investment Bank for sponsoring this event as well. That has been very useful, but as well as the sponsoring, being fully engaged in this activity, in this festival, that's been very good. So this is the risky bit where I might forget to name someone. So thank you to Lola and the team, obviously. They have done a very good job. They organised the first one, organised this one, and you will be organising the third one. But we can save that conversation for another day, Lola, don't worry. So thank you very much to Lola and the team, and we probably should start clapping now, so thank you very much. I sit with these two people at work, so I can't not thank Paula and Natalie as well. So thank you very much. You've been fully involved in the organisation of this festival, so thank you to Paula and Natalie. Unfortunately, Ralph Toomey has left, so Ralph is also involved in the organisation of the festivals. He has left, which is a shame. He had to catch the flight back this morning, but well, I guess it's being streamed, so let's clap for Ralph Toomey as well. Was that everyone? Have I forgotten anyone? Ah! And obviously, thank you to Alexandra and the team here. There are many, many people, so I'm not going to name them because there are a lot of people who have been involved to make this happen here. I understand and I do appreciate it. It's very difficult putting these things on. The festival approach makes it much more challenging for the organisation, trying to find just the physical space where we have lots of different areas to go. The very varied structure of the programme that's done, and I appreciate how challenging that is. So thank you very much to Alexandra and the team here in Serbia for making this so successful. Please thank your director. I don't think he's here, is he? So please do thank him for his support as well, and being here on the first day and last night, and for the dancing as well. He was straight in there for the dancing, wasn't he? So with that, is there anything else to say? Am I now sadly closing the festival? Okay, so thank you all very much. It has been very good. Safe travels home. I hope to see maybe all of you at the next festival if it is larger than this, but if not, I will hopefully see many of you at various other meetings, interact through various other fora, and thank you very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye. It's bad news, but the good news, upstairs there is some food for you.